Welcome to Malard at Large. Tonight, my guest is Tytti Tuppurainen, Finnish Minister of European Affairs. Right now, her TV profile by Helen Corby.
Before setting foot on the national and European stage, Tytti Tuppurainen built her career in her hometown. It's in Oulu, a coastal city in central Finland, that this mother of four children was born in 1976. The daughter of a symphony orchestra violinist and a housewife, she became involved in local life and associations very early on through environmental protection. Parallel to her studies, she even funded a company dedicated to the collection and recycling of waste, of which she became general manager. She joined the municipal council in 2000, then the regional council in 2001. 10 years later, she became a member of parliament for the Social Democrats. In the Finnish parliament, Tytti Tuppurainen was the first member of the Committee of Agriculture and Forestry, and then vice chair of the Grand Committee, which is in charge of relations with the European Parliament. Tytti Tuppurainen is developing and growing interest in European diplomacy, also leading her party's Europe Working Group. She is also very involved in various organizations and networks advocating gender equality. On June 6, 2019, Tytti Tuppurainen was appointed Minister of European Affairs and Reforms by Prime Minister Antti Rinne, a post with increased importance in recent months, the conflict in Ukraine posing a security threat to Finland. Tytti Tuppurainen is also considering her country's membership in NATO. Tonight, Tytti Tuppurainen is the guest of Malard at Large.
Mrs. Minister, Russia is next door to Finland with 1,340 kilometers of common borders. Do you feel threatened by Vladimir Putin's political, tactical war maneuvers with Ukraine?
Well, I wouldn't use the word threatened. I would say that we are prepared. Even during the past decades when there were not so many who thought that Russia was a threat, Finland was preparing for the worst. We invested in our military capacities, we kept our conscript army and so on. So we will not be hit by any surprise from the Russian side, given that we have 1,300 shared border with Russia. We are prepared, and it is Russia that shall be surprised if it tries anything. But of course, having the fact that Russia has attacked one of its neighbors, Ukraine, and it's waging an illegal war, appalling war against Ukraine, it is a cause of concern to us. But not only for us Finns, it is also a great cause of concern for the whole of the international community, European Union, and the whole world.
We do know that Vladimir Putin's dream is the rebuilding of the old Soviet empire. Can it become, according to you, a nightmare or just a wishful thinking on his part?
We have to take that seriously because he is acting accordingly. But he shall not prevail. He shall not manage to do what he's doing because the international community is responding to his actions. What we've seen is actually a more united West, much more united than Vladimir Putin ever expected. And what has happened to Russia, it's not gaining more influence in the world. Instead, it's being isolated, not only economically because of our tough sanctions, but also politically. Russia is alone, becoming more and more isolated. We've seen that in the UN General Assembly regular votes, that there are majority of the countries in the world that are condemning Russia's illegal war in Ukraine.
After 8 months' war, Vladimir Putin has not succeeded in taking control of Ukraine. Is it a major failure when we know what his expectations were from the beginning of the war?
It was clear from the beginning that it was Russia's intention to totally demolish and destroy Ukraine as a sovereign country. That was the aim. But things have not gone as Vladimir Putin intended them to go. Quite the contrary. The defense and the willingness to defend the country in Ukraine has been somewhat impressive, and it did got Russia off guard. And what we've also seen is a more united West. Our actions have been united, and we have indicated clearly to Russia that it has to withdraw its troops from Ukraine, and we will keep on supporting Ukraine militarily, politically, and economically. But it depends on Russia, what it's doing. It depends on its capability to read the situation. It is clear that a peace treaty, it's not going to be easy to achieve. But again, it is Zelensky who is defending its own country, his own territory and the sovereignty of Ukraine, and he has the support of the rest of the world.
Is there still a chance that Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky reach a peace agreement when we know about their common hatred and extreme positions?
There were peace talks in the beginning. Let us also remember that there has been willingness to negotiate. But since we saw the really appalling war crimes against innocent victims and civilian people in Ukraine, there hasn't been any chance for peace negotiations. On the last escalation, given the fact that Russia has illegally annexed Ukraine territory, claims them to be part of Russia, Ukraine has no will to negotiate, but neither do we see any will to negotiate from the Russian side. So obviously, the war is prolonging. We have to have patience. We have to keep on supporting Ukraine, and we have to make sure that Russia shall not prevail. Because at the end of the day, the opinions of President Zelensky, they are not extreme. They are the righteous kind, because he's only defending his own country and the sovereignty of Ukraine.
What would be an acceptable duration of the war?
Well, none of us has the crystal ball. The war ends when Russia withdraws its troops from Ukraine. And what it takes, we don't know yet. So clearly it depends on Russia. Will it end this war? Let's hope so. If not, then we will keep on going and supporting Ukraine.
What can be the worst and best ending scenarios?
Well, the best scenario, obviously, is the fact that Russia acknowledges 1991 borders of Ukraine. That means including Crimea as well, and withdraws all its troops from Ukraine. Clearly, that is what one hopes, and that would be the best possible outcome to this all. And any other scenario out of the fact that Russia would withdraw its troops from Ukraine is a horrible one. Any other scenario means that the war will continue. It is a war of attrition. It requires a lot of endurance from the rest of the world, and especially from Ukraine.
Are NATO and European Union strong and united enough to face the Russian threat?
NATO has kept its promise. It has its open door policy. Finland and Sweden have applied for membership in NATO. It shows that NATO as an alliance is attractive, and countries and peoples, they want to join NATO. They definitely do not want to be part of any sphere of influence of Russia. So this is what attracts peoples and nations: democratic cooperation, human rights, common values, rule of law, not the autocracy that Russia is advocating.
We have a break now. We will be back in a few minutes. We are back with our guest, Tytti Tuppurainen, Finnish Minister of European Affairs. Mrs. Minister, do you fear that to reach his goal, Vladimir Putin might be tempted to use a nuclear arm against Ukraine and extend the conflict to other countries of the region?
I'm afraid that Russia and Vladimir Putin won't stop unless he has to. So if he wins in Ukraine, he will go further. So the only thing that we need to do is to make sure that Ukraine wins this war and Russia shall not prevail. And in order to promote his intentions, Vladimir Putin might be able to use all kinds of measures in order to get where he wants to. Quite the contrary, the rest of the world thinks that this nuclear rhetoric by Russia and Vladimir Putin is utterly unacceptable, and we shall not accept normalization of using nuclear weapons.
Must NATO strengthen its positions forever at Russian borders without provoking Vladimir Putin?
What we have learned these years and these months, 2022, is that appeasement doesn't work with Vladimir Putin. You have to do what you have to do in spite of the reaction in Kremlin. And let us remember that NATO is a defense alliance. NATO by no means is threatening Russia. And clearly Russia knows it. There are no military action, for instance, close to the Finnish borders. The garrisons close to the Finnish borders are empty because Russia knows that Finland, even as a possible and in the near future NATO member, is not threatening Russia. It is Russia that is a threat to the global security order. It is Russia that is held responsible, and only Russia is responsible for triggering a war in Europe.
Turkish President Recep Erdogan, who has one foot in NATO, as you know, and one foot in Putin's backyard, has not yet officially accepted your membership in NATO. Don't you fear he might be an obstacle?
We take seriously the security concerns voiced by Turkey. We want to combat terrorism, and we want to provide with security to the whole region of the alliance, including the area of Black Sea. But this matter is also a question of credibility of the whole alliance. NATO has repeatedly voiced that its open door policy is valid, and that NATO enlargement is something that can and will happen. So now that we are applying, and everybody knows that Finland and Sweden are not only consuming security, but we will also add to the defense capabilities of NATO. So everybody understands that this is also a matter of the credibility of the whole alliance. We have negotiated a trilateral memorandum in June to Kiev, Sweden and Finland, and its implementation is well underway. So we have every reason to be hopeful that the ratification will soon take place also in Turkey.
It seems to me that the US and the Biden administrations have declared through Ukraine a proxy war against Russia, which Europe has become the hostage. Is it acceptable on the long term?
May I most clearly reject this Russian take on the issue. Quite obviously, it's not the case that Europe would be held hostage by the United States. We are beneficiaries of the policies of the United States. Together, European Union and the United States and the United Kingdom and other democracies as well, we are supporting and helping Ukraine, which has been attacked illegally by Russia. So it is Russia who nowadays looks like it wants to establish a narrative that this is a war between Russia and the West. But that is not the case. This is a war that Russia has triggered in Ukraine. And it is only Russia who is responsible for the fact that there is a war in Europe. So Russia has to back up. It has to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. And in the meanwhile, we are, together with the United States, we are helping Ukraine. And let us remember that the United States has invested massively in the help of Ukraine militarily and economically. And we have to keep on and continue with this help for as long as it takes. Because if Russia would win this war, it would be a very dangerous precedent in the world of today that a country, by using military power, could simply grab land from other sovereign countries or even invade the whole country. That is utterly unacceptable. That we shall not let happen.
The world order, issued from 1945, seems completely obsolete. Do you think it should be reshuffled, and how?
We have to recognize that it's not self-evident that the development, this path that we've seen since the Second World War, since 1945, will continue forever. That democracy and multilateral cooperation and market economy, human rights, that they will simply strengthen year by year. But what is the alternative? We know what the alternative would be. The alternative to this world order would be a superpower competition. That would be a constant struggle, a constant competition between superpowers, where small countries like Finland would unavoidably be part of some countries' spheres of interest, or in the worst case, victim of a genocide. So clearly, that's not the path that we want to go along. Quite the contrary. Still, we believe that it's worth investing in the United Nations institutions. It is worth investing in the capabilities of the European Union. And actually, we still have all the capacity it takes. We have the institutions. What we need is faith, and what we need is determination and political leadership, that we show our citizens that this is a better alternative, much better than the constant struggle. And now we can see this alternative in Ukraine. It's a destruction, it's war, and that's not the future that we want to give our children.
Do we have in front of us the ingredients of a third world conflict?
We have to take this situation very seriously. These are not calm times. These are very uneasy times. There's a lot of anxiety. But no, I still would not see a third world war ahead of us. And why? Because Russia is actually alone. It doesn't have allies. It doesn't have attraction. We are fighting hard against Russia, even though it has got some sort of support from Belarus or Iran. They are not participating in the war in Ukraine. So Russia is alone, and as long as it doesn't have allies like we do in the West, we are more united than ever. The European Union, NATO alliance, democracies in the world. We can see that in the United Nations General Assembly, the world is united, and that's the model that's going to prevail. But it's going to take some time. It's clearly things are not over easily. Ukrainians are losing lives every day. It is a painful, horrible matter of fact, but we have the patience what it takes, and we shall make sure that Russia will lose this war, and there will be better days for Europe and for the world, and we simply have to make that a reality.
On May the 7th of 2005, 17 years ago, in one of my interviews with him, Vladimir Putin told me, no enlargement of NATO, don't touch Ukraine. Should we have listened to him?
We thought that the trade would change Russia, especially Germany, thought that philosophy of Wandel durch Handel, mutual trade and cooperation, would eventually change Russia. We thought so, and actually it's very humane to think so, to be progressive. But all the time along, since the very first words of Vladimir Putin, Russia has been preparing for the war. It had no intention to be part of the international order of peaceful cooperation. Instead, it had the intention to create spheres of interest. And that explains why Russia was so heavily against NATO enlargement. It doesn't want NATO close to its borders because it wants to maintain its spheres of interest. But we cannot accept that. That is against the UN principles, that is against the principle of sovereign countries. And actually, Russia is able to promote its policies only because it is not a democracy. What Vladimir Putin is afraid the most is the power of the people, democracy. And that's the way Ukrainians want to develop their country. They want democracy, and Russia had to try to demolish that so that this illness would not spread to spill over to Russia, where Putin wants to maintain his autocracy. But let us remember that autocracies, they have an inbuilt unpredictability. So every time Russia has been weak, there has always been a possibility of a new beginning. If Russia loses this war, it may give Russian nationals a momentum to create something better. But everything depends on Russia. It has to decide on what side of the history it wants to be.
Finally, Mrs. Minister, if the US Republicans win the congressional elections, would you expect a change of policy towards Ukraine? They already said no blank check to Volodymyr Zelensky.
Well, that is something that we have to keep a very close eye on. So far, there has been a strong bipartisan support for Ukraine. I saw that myself when I visited Washington last May. There was an overwhelming support for Ukraine and also for Finland's eventual NATO accession. So it was clear that Washington was willing to stand against the imperialist wishes of Vladimir Putin's Russia. Let us hope that these talks that we constantly hear from the Republican side and from the United States as a whole, let us hope that it won't grow any bigger. Let's hope that it's only fuel for domestic policies and the United States stands where it has been long standing for freedom, for all the people in the world, and for human rights. That is the United States that we know. And it's up to the voters in the US to make the decision. And let's hope that it's for democracy.
Thank you, Madam Minister, for having accepted our invitation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It was a great pleasure.
Good evening on I-24 News, and see you soon on Malard at Large.